Katie, Dan, thank you so much for joining me today. I am excited to talk to the both of you about your pizza journeys, the joy of pizza, and before we get the conversation started, I just want to ask you, what's good dough?
It's all good dough. No matter what, good, bad, it's all good dough.
It's all good dough. Part 2.
It's all good dough part 2. Yes, it is a part 2. This is the second time I've had Dan on the podcast. And if you haven't listened to that first episode, you should definitely check it out. But I'm excited to have Katie on. And just kind of to give a little bit of background as to how this episode came together is that they co-released a book together. And it's called The Joy of Pizza. I've had the wonderful opportunity to be able to read it in advance, and so I'm happy to kind of talk about the process, just the book in general. But before we do that, I kind of want to talk about how this dynamic duo of a team came together. How did that happen?
Well, it probably started 8 or 9 years ago when we first met in Rome eating pizza. Katie lives in Rome, and when chefs travel to Rome, you hang out with Katie Parla because she's so cool. She's incredibly knowledgeable, and you always have a great time and learn so much by spending time with her.
And I'm promised pizza in exchange for my curation services. So that's valid currency in my book, and I appreciate it.
So that's the trick.
Yeah. I'll go anywhere for pizza. I'm a very simple person with simple needs. But yeah, Dan and I met like nearly a decade ago and bonded over not just our love of pizza, which like is easy to love. Everyone loves it. But also, growing up in New Jersey and having like a really deep respect for agriculture in our state, which doesn't always get the recognition, respect that it deserves, and a sort of mutual desire to shed light on people who are making great food.
After 8 or 9 years of knowing each other, does someone make the call like, oh, I'm ready to make the pizza book and I want Katie to write it? Or does Katie initiate this like book idea? Can you go over that real quickly?
I'd been approached previously in the past about writing a book, and everyone told me don't write a book unless you really have something to say. So I got to a point in my pizza journey that I wanted to share some knowledge that I've gained over 18, 19 years of making pizza. So my first phone call was to Katie to ask advice. Should I do it? What's the process like? How do I get from here to a finished book? So she guided me every step of the way, from finding an agent to selling the book and then finding a writer. It only made sense for us to do this together, and I'm just so grateful that she actually said yes.
Well, I'm incredibly grateful for your trust, and I've written a ton of cookbooks and have made like a lot of mistakes along the way and learned so much. So I think that I actually remember that phone call. I was sitting on this couch, the sun was setting out of the window, which like just bathes my whole living room in this gorgeous Roman light. And I was like, is this a sign? Like, are we going to do this? And it was probably another year and a half before the whole agent thing came together and the interest from like a variety of publishers was kind of churning. And then we started to put words on paper in what was not a traditional proposal. Like, this is Dan's first cookbook. You generally have to write like a pretty detailed proposal with everything laid out and clearly defined and like an annotated table of contents and sample chapters. And we did a little bit of sample writing and proposed the structure, but also a lot of that kind of changed along the way with, as we were sort of understanding how to communicate the topics of Dan's pizza making and just seeing how, all of the topics, as you know from having read the book, are really layered. So like, yeah, there are recipes, right? But it's more than just recipes. It's about understanding that the ingredients have to be approached in a certain way because they're the product of agriculture. And it's like all of these nuances. So once we knew the sort of general themes that we wanted to cover, It was another year and a half before we had like a sort of final manuscript, which developed into what you see bound today.
So awesome. And I think this is such a great partnership because, like you've said yourself, Katie, you've written a ton of books. Like, I think on your website it says you've contributed to 30. I know you have a couple of solo books yourself. And just Dan is one of my pizza heroes in this community. And it's like I see two greats kind of clashing together to make one freaking awesome book. And it's exciting what's happening in this community is just this great amount of knowledge coming out. And just one more question about the book is that, like, how do you can you both just kind of explain your roles in the book? Because I want to know, like, how do you split up the work when there are two people contributing?
Katie did most of the work.
I have a Google account and started writing a document on Drive. But, I've got so many, we wrote this book during a freaking pandemic. I have like so many memories of like the process and we talked on the phone for hours a day. And Dan is, anyone out there who's listening who is familiar with pizza geniuses know that their brain operates in like a different plane. I'm a scribe. I also have a lot of pizza knowledge. I know what people need to know in terms of like content in cookbooks, but the stuff that's happening in a more cerebral space, in a more fermentation-based space, like Dan has all of that knowledge in spades. And so my job is just to take what he knows and put it in a format that fulfills like kind of the requirements of the publisher. Not romantic, but that's a thing. And also, communicates his vision, which I know kind of sounds like hyperbolic, but it really is this vision of what pizza can be and this journey towards pizza greatness, for lack of a better term. This drive to like, you're making pizza, but you're also doing all that you can to harness that amazing work that has been done in a field. So it's like Dan spoke words after 20 years of making pizza, just like riffs, talks about things. I ask some questions, he riffs some more. And then from that, I just distill it and make it into something that, a publishing house will accept.
Dan, do you have anything to add to that? Or does that pretty much sum it all up?
Yeah, we just talked and talked and talked. She asked incredible questions, and the first part of it, the first few months, were just conversations and really trying to extract, like Katie said, so many years of making pizza and so much studying that I've done. It all did not come out in a linear manner at all. So we got all the information out there, and then we started to organize it and refine it, and we kept refining constantly until it was too late to refine anymore. But if we had another year, I think it would be even more refined and stripped down. There's a lot of things we took out because we didn't want to make it unapproachable for the home cook, while also leaving really pertinent information in and really going deep into things that the professional will take so much from the book. So it's both for the professional and the home cook. And we really tried to make it approachable to everyone.
Yeah, and I love everything about working on this book with you, Dan. It was like one of my great professional and personal honors. But what I think is so important to like what you had in mind is that this is something that stands up to professional scrutiny while also being accessible. And those things aren't mutually exclusive. And there are so many great pizza books out there. And what I think, bias alert, I think what this one does really seamlessly is it gives, it's like an A to Z without it feeling too simple or too complex. And, we're just paving the way. This is like intro to Dan's pizza, which is always evolving too. So it'll be really interesting to see how the next book builds on the lessons and the concepts that we put forth in The Joy of Pizza. And yeah, like I'm just sort of like reminiscing. Like I think the first 5 straight nights that we worked on the book, I was like, tonight's tomato night. Tell me about tomatoes. Tonight's olive oil night. Talk to me about olive oil. Hey, want to break it down? Tell me about flour. And it was so much of that, which ends up, ultimately a lot of that stuff ended up in the book. But then creating a sort of framework that, holds people's hands, not in like a patronizing way, but like guides you. It's this guidebook through honing your pizza skills. And so I think it's telling that we started with ingredients, because you can't just jump right into like, okay, what's the pizza recipe? What's the hydration? What's the desired dough temperature? What type of like flour are you using? You got to talk about like the fundamentals, like the characteristics and the science behind each of those ingredients before you can even think about putting them together and mixing flour and water.
Yeah. And before you can even make a choice on what flour to use, right? You have to understand flour and wheat and what makes them different, what makes them similar. And, every step of the process, you're guided from the ingredients to the techniques to the recipes. One of my favorite things about the book is that there's QR codes scattered all throughout the book that link to a little 10 to 20 second video of me performing that technique. Because when I started making pizza, there really weren't any great pizza books. And now, so I learned a lot by trial and error. And I always wished that I had somebody standing next to me showing me, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is what it's supposed to feel like. So I think that's a very valuable part of the book.
The QR codes, genius. Also, just the production in terms of the media, the pictures, the illustrations, the videos, all of that, so top notch, and it helps when people need just a different, method of learning. Like some people, they need those types of media to be able to digest it even better.
I was one of those people.
For sure, I am too.
Yeah, that's real.
Yeah, it really is. And, just going back to this whole, like, if I had more time, it would be better. Just because, like, I feel like that is so you in terms of, like, things are always evolving. So you're never going to be happy with yesterday's pizza or yesterday's book. But just to comment on it, I thought full on, it was one of the best pizza books that I've read. And because I'm starting to go with the whole philosophy of like, you can't prescribe pizza. It like an art, like you can maybe like explain just like the foundations or the basics, but it really is up to you to explore. And sometimes, as a business owner who's been set in their ways and they follow the same like recipe from the 90s or the 50s or whatever, they just keep following that. And for the home pizza maker looking to start, you're looking for the best recipes for the uni or the best pizza at home. But what this book does really well is it has the foundation and the basics, and then you encourage everyone to explore. And that is your kind of the way you do things at Ratza, right? You're always exploring.
Because it's a journey, and for me, all of the joy is in the journey and the connections that we make, the things we learn along the way, and just trying new things constantly in order to make it a little bit better tomorrow than it was today.
And that's something that even a curious home baker can apply to their own pizza practice. Like, it's so tempting to want to get a mill and start milling flour and use like 16 different recipes, but there's so much like beauty in like that repetition of sticking to one recipe, nailing it, then understanding fully how it works, and then moving on to maybe tweaking the hydration for a new temperature oven or introducing some whole wheat flour but in small quantities, and like seeing pizza making as a practice rather than just an occasional event, I think is going to up people's pizza games. And Dan's recipes for the dough are just, they're so like logically scaled in terms of like the beginner recipe, like the everyday dough. That's something that anyone can make that, and it will be really satisfying. And then once you've nailed that, even if you've never made dough before, if you just practice that, then you can move on to slightly more advanced steps with incredible results. And I think that's also important because pizza practice is fun. And like, I know Dan loves experimenting. I love experimenting, but it's so much more fun when you have like the reward of seeing the results, not necessarily just for you, but like for the other people who are doing it. You're not making pizza for yourself. You're making it for the experience of it. And like the audience is your family, your friends, your loved ones. And I love that, the idea of like joy and imparting this like experience that's very loving is part of it, because that's also what pizza is about.
Definitely. That's the most important part.
The secret ingredient is love.
As cheesy as that
Sharing
sounds, I have to agree. One thing that these words that stand out to me is curiosity, like something that you said, Katie. And another thing that we had kind of uncovered is in our pre-chat was that you're a connector of things. And like, can you just talk about those two words, curiosity and connecting, and how that revolves in your everyday life and how that was translated into the book?
Okay, so curiosity to me is one of the driving forces behind being able to get out of bed in the morning. I have to be trying something new. As soon as we nail a dough recipe, we immediately change it because we need to learn, and my team needs the engagement, and I need the engagement in order to continue. If we're just following a recipe that we know works, that's boring and nobody grows. And one of our core values at the restaurant is growth. Like, we have to be constantly moving forward as individuals, but also collectively. And when we try something new, it's a reason for engagement and conversation. And my team always, and I always learn so much by changing things. And it's through those experimentations, usually through failures, that we learn so much. As soon as we're successful on a consistent basis and the pizza is up to the level, then we change it. We'll change the flour, or we'll change the temperatures that we're fermenting at. We'll change the starter feeding maintenance. There's so many different nuances, and it makes us better bakers and better pizza makers and more confident pizza makers by being able to have the depth of knowledge to withstand any environmental factors that occur. Like, if somebody left if somebody left the air conditioning on too cold overnight and everything's moving slowly, well, we know how to adapt to that and make changes on the fly so that the next batch of dough is the same or better than it was, prior.
Katie, how are you able to translate Dan's curiosity in pizza making into the book, and to be able to have readers replicate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the ways is just by laying out his quest for ingredients that are going to fulfill the promise of their agricultural source, which you attain through lots of tasting and asking questions and going to farms. And so that sort of like that curiosity that starts at like the very building blocks of the pizza is something that we lay out in the ingredients section. And then in terms of like the always improving, tweaking the dough, learning from your mistakes, comes in the dough recipes chapter, where it starts with the everyday dough, which is a yeasted dough that uses white flour, and then moves on in these incrementally more challenging steps towards a choose your own adventure, which is not just one recipe, it's like infinite recipes, because it gives you visual cues rather than timing. It's giving you the tools to assess based on what your individual choices of flour happen to be. And Dan mentioned a word that I think is really important, which is failure. and you can't grow and learn without making a fuck ton of mistakes. That's how, like, that's where the space for growth and fuller understanding comes. Because if you're nailing it every time, or if like your audience is telling you, yeah, this is great, this is perfect, awesome, keep doing that. Like, what do you actually learn about the process? You're just replicating a recipe rather than like really engaging with it. And, on that note, the like, still staying with the curiosity theme, like, I love the amount of like hands in the dough that there are. You can use a mixer. Dan and I both have bomb ass mixers. Shout out to Famag. They're dope if you're making a lot of dough. But hand mixing is like, that's this tactile curiosity. Like, what is happening under my fingertips? What does the dough feel like? Is there gluten development? What does that even mean? How do I determine that? How is this dough changing over time, and how am I influencing that? So, we're not just talking about recipes or ingredients, but also like the entire process of developing this dough into something you're ultimately going to bake and eat and share.
Reminder for folks, I think Dan was the first person to admit to me that he actually closed the store. He was the first person I learned from that he's actually closed the stores before when his dough wasn't ready. And I was like, that at the time, maybe a year ago in July, was preposterous to me. I was like, you actually closed down the store? But that just goes to show how much how high of a standard that, the pizza makers at Razza have to have to be able to serve their product. It's all about quality. It's all about learning from these failures so you don't got to make them again.
Definitely.
You had mentioned the make your own dough adventure, or your own dough adventure, right? That part of the book. Sorry if I butchered that. But I think
choose your own adventure.
We're
both like
adventure.
Yeah. I don't know, like, you're much younger than us, so we don't know if there was a choose your own adventure themed book situation when you were growing up. But in the 80s, choose your own adventure was like I think it was new at the time. It's like, okay, you're reading this book and then you're like, okay, I'm going to stop here. And then you get to choose, do I go to like this page or this page? And it's like a whole thing. But you can see it in museums these days. It's a relic of the past, but choose your own adventure dough is, it's great. Dan, why don't you talk a little bit about it? Cause it's something that kind of developed also over time.
Yeah. So, we wanted to give people a methodology for how to make a dough with a flour that you've never worked with before, or some flour that you are really passionate about. Maybe it's a local miller who came to you and said, like, you found it at the farmer's market and you really want to make dough with it. Well, you can't just rely on any recipe and swap out the flour. All flours are so different, and they have different specs. They have different gluten quantity and different gluten quality. They have different amounts of germ and bran in the flour. So we needed to create a methodology and a way for people to utilize these products that they want to use, and just give them the visual and tactile cues to know when it's ready to shape, or when you've reached full gluten development, things like that. But the world it's an infinite variation. The recipe has so many different variations. It'll depend on what products you choose.
And that's where you could really make a pizza that is of a place.
Yeah.
Like, of course, the everyday dough beginner recipe starts with white flour. That has no sense of origin, right? It's a shelf-stable product, which is great for a number of reasons. But when you're getting into things that are freshly and locally milled, or not even necessarily locally milled, maybe you're in New Jersey and buying things from Washington State, like, awesome. They're expressing the place that they come from and the experience that grain has had and choices that the miller has made. And I think that's something that's really beautiful, but is an advanced approach to things. Not just because of the brand and germ in there, but also because of the flavor profiles and things, and just sort of like the learning curve of working with freshly milled flours, which ferment at different rates than the shelf stable stuff.
Yeah, and they'll feel differently in your hands. They'll have a different amount of elasticity or extensibility. But it also, we started talking earlier about connectivity, and that recipe is ripe for connectivity. Finding a miller in your area and going to the mill and experiencing the process and what they go through, and how all of that information that you learn with them then impacts your pizza and the choices that you make with ingredients. But you can't just swap out some freshly milled, locally grown wheat for all-purpose flour.
100%. And it's like, I love how this part of the book is kind of closer to the end, because it ensures that people read through the basics and the foundation first. And it's kind of, and it builds upon the lessons that you learn prior to that. But this to me was the part that it kept kind of like hinting like, look out for this section. And I was like, man, I can't wait to get to it, because I really wanted to hear what you had to say about it. And now that I'm kind of remembering how the book is set up, you have a pretty high hydrated dough, just in general. And you give options for, you're cooking in your home oven, which to me is like at a super high hydration. Do you ever, and then you also have, things for like the uni. Do you feel that like the higher hydration dough sets up just the novice or beginning home pizza maker at a disadvantage because it's so highly hydrated?
I think it's actually an advantage because it's easier to mix, it's easier to knead, it's easier to fold, it's easier to stretch open. The only part that's a little bit more difficult is launching the pizza from your peel into the oven, which is a skill in itself, whether you're low hydration or high hydration. But the main thing is your dough recipe really needs to match the oven that you're using. I feel like most pizza books that are on the market are written by restaurant chefs or professionals, and they just take their restaurant recipe and put it in a book. But you change the oven, and baking at a lower temperature really requires a higher hydration in the dough because the heat's lower. So water is a much better conductor of heat than air is. Okay, so when you're baking at that lower temperature, you need to transfer the heat from the oven into your dough faster, and that added water in the dough enables that to happen.
Katie, I'm curious, did you try any of these at home now that you have like these recipes? How did you feel about the higher hydration doughs? Is Dan spot on? Did you have any issues? What was your experience like, if any?
Yeah, I mean, I've tried all the recipes, and I've been baking pizza at home in a home oven for years now. So I have a ton of experience with that. And then in February, just in time for like a hardcore Italian lockdown, I got an uni. And so that was really fun to play around with. But I've always baked high hydration doughs, like 15 years ago, not quite 12 years ago, when I started making pizza, after taking a class with Gabriele Bonci, the famous Roman pizza maker. His doughs are 80% hydration, and so I wouldn't say that like I had like great baker's hands right away, but I didn't know what 62% hydration felt like. I'd never encountered something so low before. So I was always in a Roman setting working with those high hydration doughs, which makes sense because Roman pizza in teglia is baked in an electric deck oven for over 10 minutes, if not
at the similar temperature as your home oven.
Mm-hmm.
It's in that 470, 475 to 500 range. So it makes sense that the doughs would be similar.
Mm-hmm.
I admittedly haven't had a chance to make any of the recipes myself, but I do, remember working with 70% hydration for the first time in my first pizza book, and I thought it was very easy. But you're encouraging people to start off with like 73 to 80, or closer to 73 to 80 around there, and I was just like, whoa. This is cool. I like it. I like how it starts there because it does make a better pizza for the homemaker, and it encourages people who haven't tried a higher hydration dose to just go for it.
And also, like,
especially
it would be great if everyone got sent an uni, right? That'll be dope. But in reality, like, you don't have to have any special equipment to appreciate what's in this book. This is a book for home ovens that also has wood-fired and high temperature oven recipes and information. But this is fundamentally for making the best pizza you've ever had at home in your oven. We're going to put Ratz out of business with this if everyone starts making bomb-ass pizza,
Dan. You just might. Katie, I have a question for you. You know, Dan just does some like amazing things at the restaurant, right? Just again, he does the like he freezes pork broth and then puts it on pizza, and that to me was like mind blowing. When you were having these conversations, what was like the most surprising thing that Dan told you that you had to transcribe onto a piece of paper?
Oh, that's a really good question. Okay, so I just want to preface this with I love calipers. I love tools. I am very into like all sort. What did I send you with the signed book? With the signed book plates, a fucking caliper.
She sent me a handmade caliper from Italy.
So I love calipers.
And I will treasure that forever.
It wasn't difficult for me to like also love this concept. It was very much in me. What's hard is to make it sound cool to people who aren't pizza nerds. So a caliper is useful for understanding like the thickness of your zucchini or the squash or whatever the topping is, your guanciale, so that it's consistent and that it works with the temperature of the oven and the duration of the bake. So, you know, the reason Dan's pepperoni pizza at Razza and in the book is so freaking delicious and has those Roni cups that are flawless every time is because he's slicing those really, really thin, but every single piece is the same thinness and it's baking properly. And this is something that I really love about the book. Like when it comes to like the cheese, for example, we say like start with a 1-inch cube or tear to 1-inch pieces, do a test pie, and then see how the cheese behaves. Because you're kind of thinking about the topping, not just as something you put on the pizza and cook, but as something that you have to adjust the size and sometimes temperature of in order to make it maximally enjoyable in the finished product. So making,
exactly.
I don't know if calipers
if your
sound cool,
cheese is old, yeah, I love that.
You were saying if your cheese is old?
I was going to say if you were, yeah, or not old, but one of my favorite pictures in the book is we show some cheese that was made today and the way it melts versus cheese that's made yesterday and the way that melts, and it's a completely different melt. So the size of the piece of cheese and how you handle it and how you treat it is going to change every single day. There's no one size fits all, right? You can't just say cut your cheese this way and it'll be perfect. It really depends on the fat, the moisture, and the protein of the cheese, and that'll influence how it melts.
Yeah, I was just, unrelated to the book, but just I was watching your pizza Zoom with the two of you, and I think you were talking about how you use 3 different sauces for your pizzas, and depending on if it's a pizza rosa or just a margarita, because of the different the varying height water contents, moisture contents, and that and cheese will affect that moisture content depending on what cheese you use, how thick it is, all of that. So that was super interesting to me, how the detail, the level of focus that you put into your pizzas. And I was clapping over here on the side and laughing hilariously because that was the one thing, Katie, unplanned, that I was hoping you'd bring up, because that to me was the most surprising. just the level of detail that goes into razza by using that one tool, the calipers, to measure the crust height and to measure the ingredient thickness. And really it's all because you have this like huge evaluation rubric that you follow, that your team follows. I'd love to talk about that, because that in and of itself is like also just goes to show, you know, how ridiculously, you know, specific you are when it comes to pizza.
Yeah, so it's basically a set of blueprints that we use at Razza to evaluate our progress, to train our staff, to hold our staff accountable for making the pizza that we want them to make. I feel like, especially in a professional sense, we can't hold our staff accountable or expect them to do something that we don't set them up for success with. So it was really a way for me to just explain exactly what I'm looking for in a pizza, and for me to organize my thoughts and my ideas about what pizza I wanted to create, because there was no roadmap. You know, there was no set of blueprints, so I had to create them, and it took decades, you know, to come up with this. And again, these are just my blueprints. You know, the reader of this book should take liberties with it, and if you don't like a certain feature, then change it. It's highly personal. And I love being able to get my thoughts out there and then be able to put together the pizza in a way that I want it to be. Because it is a lot of, it's pizza making is a set of small steps, and we have the ability each step of the way to be great or to not be great, and it all impacts each other. So I wanted to share that with people with the book.
As we kind of alluded to earlier, this seems like the perfect partnership. You two both are high energy. Y'all grew up in New Jersey. You all love pizza. I'm kind of curious to know, like, you know, like you two partnered up on the book. Were there any difficult moments? Just because, like, it seems like, you know, not everything in life is perfect, right? So I would love to hear, what were the difficult moments, if any?
Katie probably has a lot for me, but I don't have one for her.
I don't have
not one moment.
I don't have any
of feeling like, oh, this is not working out, or I wish this would happen. We have such a trusting relationship of each other that there hasn't been one moment for me that has felt uncomfortable or that I needed to say something. If I need to say something, I just tell her. You know, if I need to change a word or a thought, she was patient with me, because I had a lot of those moments of like, oh, this doesn't sound right, or, you know, can we say it this way? And the answer was always, yeah, of course.
Yeah,
she's just amazing.
You're amazing, and I feel so grateful that you trusted me with this project. And I'm like, yeah, I'm tearing up, big deal, because it's, you know, this is something that was like, I've been in a lot of business partnerships, I've been in a lot of writing partnerships, and sometimes they're really challenging. And this was so much fucking work. I've never worked on a book so many hours before, and every second I was like, this is cool as shit, dude. I get to be writing this book with Dan Richer, and the world is going to get this awesome product at the end. And like, product is debasing what the contents are. Like, this is like Dan's absolute like heart and soul, and the things that he treasures so deeply that he's eager to share. So there was there was never an option to not be like patient or grateful. Like, it was, I would love to work with you again, Dan, is what I'm saying. And I would recommend you to others, but I hope that we can, I'll give you a great recommendation if you hire another writer next time, but great endorsement. But Yeah, it was kind of the dream project. This doesn't happen all the time.
Dope. I mean, I imagine it doesn't happen all the time. Like I could see it in you two. You all have real smiles on, not fake smiles on, and like it's cool. I think the reason why I ask that is because I always want listeners to be able to learn a lesson from these episodes. And like I imagine there is someone listening right now who has considered writing a book, or is a pizza maker that wants to write a book, and maybe you can just don't do it. Okay, that's the piece of advice. Don't do it.
I mean, I'm of course, big hypocrite over here. This is like my 7th cookbook. But Dan, what did you ask me back in the day, and what did I respond?
I asked you what it's like to write a book, and should I do it? And you said absolutely not. You said writing it's fine, editing will ruin your life. Yeah. And you were spot on.
I stand by that. It's irresponsible to encourage someone to do something that truly brings chaos into your life, it sounds so like melodramatic. Writing 60,000 words feels easy compared to the like very fast turnaround that you have to do on an edit that has more hours demanded to make it good than you could ever dream of having. And it, the demands on this professional, like contractually based work means that, your personal life suffers, your family life has to be compromised. Like it's really hard. It makes me say the F word on podcasts all the time. And I realize, I apologize for dropping the F bomb. I realized I was doing that before. I'm not going to do that this time. But I mean, if you want to write a book, don't do it. If you want to write a book, call me and I'll tell you all the mistakes I've made so you don't make them too.
Yeah, editing was really difficult for me.
What do you mean by that? Like, you both talked about the editing process and how it seems like it's shit. By the way, you can cuss as much as you want here. But can you give me an example? Like, I'm just curious to know, like, what about editing is so hard? So
I didn't get into the pizza business because I like sitting behind a computer or reading in general. I love reading things I'm interested in and when I'm absorbing knowledge, but when it's our own work and just reading it constantly every couple of weeks and obsessing over every word that was used and punctuation mark and making sure that the recipes weren't randomly changed by somebody along the way. Things like that happen, and we need to make sure that they're right. That was really difficult for me. There were the last 2 edits they gave us Friday evening. We got the edits, and we had to give it back to them on Monday morning. And this is a 288-page book, and
we had to read it twice to make sure. I mean, we only had time to read it twice, like very quickly. But yeah, I mean, and that's just the timelines are crazy because you sign a contract and they're like, okay, see you in a year, and then they're like, okay, here are the edits back, like turn those around fast. And you're like, oh, that was hard, and then it just gets like more intense. And Dan is a really, really brilliant mind, and like, I mean, this is something that like will stay with me forever. Like I'll read a page to you. Because I read the manuscript out loud to Dan several times because the idea of sitting in front of a computer, it's a nightmare for anyone, but like especially for Dan who doesn't want to be doing that, I'm like, let me read it to you. So I'd read something and then he'd like be able to say, okay, like change these 2 words after hearing hundreds of words. And so that also is kind of the perfect partnership because I think if we were both just like sitting in front of paper with a pen, we wouldn't have caught the same errors or understood the text, wasn't really clicking. So having those 2 different types of like learning and editing styles converge here, I think made the book better. But yeah, if you want to write a cookbook, you shouldn't do it. It sucks.
Okay.
Unless you have something really good to say.
Yeah, I mean, also like, of course,
if you got something really good to say, you gotta get it out there. Of course,
and like, yeah. So don't listen to me. Listen to Dan.
I think you had a lot to say, Dan, and I'm glad Katie was able to put it all on paper because, like, I think I'm not trying to overplay this or underplay it whatsoever, but I really think this is a solid book. One that has taught me a lot, and I feel like it is so wide and deep at the same time. And so I'm glad you all went through the trouble of editing and writing and collaborating in the pandemic to make this happen. I usually, do some rapid fire questions. I also ask what's one mistake people can avoid. I think I'm going to skip the one mistake part because I feel like that in right there, what we just talked about was the mistake that people can avoid. Don't write a cookbook, or and then just be prepared for the editing. But I do want to go over these rapid fire questions because people are dying to know what Dan Richard is using at Ratza in case it's changed, because I know you give these answers a lot. But I also want to incorporate some new rapid fire questions that both of you can participate in. So the first set of questions are for Dan, and then the second set of questions will be for the both of you, and I would like an answer from the both, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Cool. So Dan, what flour do you use at Ratza right now?
Right now, we're using a blend of Central Milling T85 and King Arthur unbleached all-purpose flour. We're in the process of working on getting Carn Springs Mill distributed here on the East Coast, and I just got word that it should be in by January, February, so our pizza dough is going to change, and it's going to be completely different. Nobody should actually notice because we're still working from the same set of blueprints, but it will change.
Just out of curiosity, is that replacing one of the two flours that you're using, or you're incorporating a third into the mix? And which Carn Springs will you be using?
No, we'll probably we're going to probably use their it's called Glacier Peak. It's your Coro Rojo wheat, and we'll probably start with a blend. And then ideally, I'd like to convert over to that 100%. But that's how I feel right now. It might feel differently.
This is why it's important to ask these questions today.
And then it'll change.
Tomatoes. What tomatoes are you using?
We have 5 different tomatoes in the restaurant right now. We have 3 different types from Gustiamo, which is an Italian importer based in the Bronx. They're every product that they carry is just fantastic. We also use some. We're at the very end of tomato season. So last week was our last week, but we were using fresh plum tomatoes, field grown from southern New Jersey. We also have the Jersey Fresh canned tomato, which is really delicious. Kind of tells the story of New Jersey. We have a little bit of Muti tomato passata that we use in some applications, and Alta Cucina from Stanislaus in California.
Nice. We should just have a podcast on tomatoes one day. You are using so many.
Hell yeah.
And by the way,
they're all so different and unique.
Yeah, and you go pretty deep into the book on what to look out for, so that section was extremely useful. Cheese.
Oh, and we love Bianco di Napoli tomatoes also. I forgot those. Too many to think of.
Of course. Cheese.
That's what I feed my kids here at home. Cheese, we have... Okay, so are we talking mozzarella?
Sure.
Let's talk mozzarella, because we have like 12 different cheeses at the restaurant that are not mozzarella. Mozzarella, we always keep at least 2 different ones in the restaurant at all times. One is fresh mozzarella that we make in-house every morning and use it that day. We also have a fantastic partnership with a local cheese maker. His name's Sal Pisani. He's got a herd of cows. They milk the cows, and then they make cheese on the farm about 20 feet away from where the cows are grazing. It's a true expression of those cows grazing on that land. They're grass-fed. The cheese changes throughout the year based on what the cows are eating and how they're producing. It's more of a single origin cheese, and it's just fantastic. So we like to have those two different ones so we can compare and contrast, and our guests can have two very different experiences. They're both fantastic, but they are different.
If you had one topping to use on your pizzas, either pre-bake or post-bake, what would you limit yourself to?
Oh, if I only had one topping, can it be sauce and cheese?
It could be sauce and cheese. Just that?
Sauce and cheese. I just need a margarita pizza.
Okay, good to know.
Give me a margarita.
Give me a margarita.
Little basil.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Because I love the variations. You change the tomato, it changes the pizza. You change the cheese, it changes the pizza. Basil before the bake or after the bake, completely different experiences. They're both fantastic. We like doing both ways.
Yeah. Keep it simple, but also very, very, very different each time.
Yeah, and if you keep it simple, you can really dig deeper into the nuance, and I love the details.
Oven. What oven are you using?
At home, I use my home oven. I also have an Uni. I have a Rockbox. I have a Breville. At the restaurant, we have two custom Forza Forni ovens. They're the core is Pavesi, but they built them in the space with a ton of extra insulating material to really hold that heat in. Thankfully, I have a really good relationship with Peter and the guys over at Forza Forni. So when we were putting both ovens in, we were able to really have that conversation of, this is how I want it to perform. What can we do about it to make it better? And that's part of what we were talking earlier about connectivity. If you have that relationship, then you can make alterations. Like if I talk to Sal from Jersey Girl Cheese and say the cheese is not melting the same right now, what's the difference? How can we treat it differently to get it to melt the way that I am? And it's because of that relationship that we have that back and forth and that conversation.
That's really cool. I haven't heard of people asking to add extra insulation to their ovens.
Oh, hell yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Wow, that makes a lot of sense.
It's super important.
That's a nugget right there.
Anytime you can bring more thermal mass into your oven, you're going to get better results, especially on a professional sense, where we're baking hundreds of pizza in succession. We need that thermal mass to hold the heat.
This is the last question for Dan. If you were to describe your pizza in one sentence, how would you go about doing that? Kind of like an elevator pitch.
That's artisanal American pizza. There's no style. We focus on local ingredients, and we just put it together with the American palate in mind. It's not Neapolitan.
Okay. A few questions for the both of you that I'd like your response for. Favorite recipe in the book?
Natale pizza all the way. Di Natale pizza.
That's a good one. Katie and I were having lunch on Mount Vesuvius a couple of years ago at this incredible restaurant that she took me to, and this one pasta dish just blew my mind. It's a pasta recipe in one of her cookbooks, and the pizza is based around our experience together, and it's a very special pizza.
It's such a delicious pizza. It's got nuts, dried fruits, chili oil, tomato, mozzarella, olives, oregano, capers. Bomb.
Love it. And then that's pizza for the both of you is your favorite, or Dan, did you have a different one?
I don't have a favorite. It's like asking who's your favorite kid, which of your kids is your favorite. I just can't do it.
Okay, that's fair.
I don't have kids, so it's not a problem for me.
You just reminded me why I don't ask pizza makers this question, but I thought it may be different because it was in relation to the book, but I guess it applies here too. That's fair.
They all have a meaning and a reason behind them, and they all impacted me in weird ways. Most of them are because of an ingredient that I got from a farmer I liked, or traveling to Rome or traveling to Japan. I have all of these experiences that manifested in all the pizzas in the book. So it's really difficult to choose one.
Cool. Favorite photo from the book?
The one of me and Katie at the end.
Oh, I love that one too. I like the one where I love fennel pollen a lot. I like the one where the fennel pollen's being tossed over Elizabeth Faulkner's fennel pizza.
That's a great shot. And I love the one of me looking awkward standing next to a cow.
Why do you say that's awkward, Dan? This is our first... Look, let's not have our first fight on what's good dough, please. Not awkward.
I'm so awkward around animals. I just don't understand them.
You look adorable. All of those pictures where you're talking to cows are among my favorite works of art ever, so stop it.
Oh, yeah, the pictures are all great and beautiful. Again, high quality.
Yeah, shout out to Eric Wolfinger.
Eric did such a good job.
And shout out to Katie Shelley for the illustrations.
Yes, shout outs. Favorite moment writing the book?
Oh my god. I mean, every day at your house in New Jersey was pretty dope. Eating pizza with you and your family. That was awesome.
Yeah, you making pizza with my daughter.
So fun.
That was amazing. The week of the photo shoot was one of the best weeks of my life.
Yeah, it was so good.
It was just such a special process documenting it with Katie and with Eric and his team, and it's just amazing.
And it's one of the few times I've ever set off fireworks and not hurt myself.
About the fireworks.
I love that.
We did light fireworks.
We sure did. No wine was involved.
So much wine.
Okay. I'm FOMOing out right here. I wish I was there.
You got to come hang out.
If you'll have me, I'd love to set fireworks off and drink some wine with you too. That sounds great. And I want to know, how has the joy of pizza, in terms of just like your understanding of it, changed from the beginning to the end? What does the joy of pizza mean to you now?
I think by really thinking about it and the process of writing it, for me, the joy is in the journey and the connectivity. Persisting through failure after failure and mediocre pizza after mediocre, and finally getting to a really good result. And it's that success that's built on so many failures and so many mistakes. You just feel so good when you nail it, and then when you can repeat that success. The journey is everything, and meeting the people along the way. Meeting Katie, she's part of my journey, and now like basically had a baby together.
Yeah, I mean, I think before working on this book with Dan, I was really pragmatic about pizza. I loved eating. Well, pragmatic about making pizza. I love the act of like going to a pizzeria, eating there, like spending time with friends. But before, embarking on this journey with Dan, I hadn't really taken time to make pizza because I wanted to. I was taking time to make pizza because I was testing it for a cookbook or developing it or whatever. Like, it was always work. And, obviously the pandemic was shit, garbaggio, straight up. But because of, I wasn't giving tours, which is what I do usually in Rome, I had all this time to like actually spend with the dough and think about it. And that like nurturing aspect, nurturing the dough, nurturing myself, nurturing my friends, that was all a really special and joyful endeavor that I'd never really experienced before. Thanks, Dan.
Yo, I'm getting the feels. I love it. Thank you for sharing. Really read the book, because there is a lot of that. Just the behind the scenes. I don't want to give away too much, but Dan's search for pizza is super, super meaningful. And, we were a little past time, so I think just everyone get the book. And I guess my final question is for you all is, where can and should people get the book?
So you can get the book wherever books are sold, but wouldn't it be so nice to support a small business? If you go to thejoyofpizzabook.com, just follow the purchase your copy button, and you'll find a number of independent bookshops that are offering signed copies for pre-order. Now serving in Los Angeles, Omnivore in San Francisco, Booklarder in Seattle, Archistratus in Brooklyn, Word Bookstores in Jersey City and Brooklyn, and Words in Maplewood. And we're very, very grateful for these partnerships.
Yeah, and you can get signed copies there. And for me, I look at, I saw Amazon's already discounting the book to undercut the indie bookstores. And it's just so awful. So the more we can support small businesses, the same way we support independent operated pizzerias, you should do that with bookstores too.
Yes.
Dope. And I feel like I just want to announce this ahead of time before it gets lost, but I'll be giving away one book to whoever shares this episode. I'll be buying from not from Amazon, so we'll figure out the logistics of that. But if you're listening to this now, share this episode and I will enter you in a raffle to get the book for free. I will be purchasing it myself. Dan and Katie did not know about this. They're not giving me one to give away to you. I'll be supporting the book because this book has given me joy. I find joy in learning and knowledge and really great stories. And so I thank you both for sharing this with me and, just making the time today. Thanks.
Thank you for your very thoughtful questions. This was so much fun. Really enjoyed this. Grazie.
Cool.
And come hang out with me.
Come to Rome. No, Jersey's great, but have you heard about Rome?
Have I heard about it? Let's meet somewhere in the middle. Just kidding.
Right on.
I'd be, yeah. Thank you both. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Ciao.
Yeah, ciao.
Be good.
Ciao, ciao.